Greetings from Pintpot. Welcome to my latest edition of Climbing the Curve. Now over the next 2 episodes I'm going to be taking a look at anti-aircraft weapons, and specifically their capabilities in terms of area denial and kill potential against enemy aircraft. Now there are 3 dedicated anti-aircraft guns for vehicles. These are the Skyguard, the Walker and the Ranger. Now both the Skyguard and the Ranger are flat cannons. Flat cannons do both direct damage and explosive damage. If a flak shell gets close enough to an enemy aircraft, it will blow up. This mechanic means it's much easier to hit with a flat cannon than say with a machine gun. Now to balance out the fact it's a lot easier to hit with them, as a rule of thumb flat cannons do less damage than direct damage dealing anti-aircraft machine guns. However, when you look at the data and the times to kill for each of the various anti-aircraft weapons, you might want to challenge this assumption. After all, it is Skyguards, which are a flat cannon, which have the shortest time to kill, rather than Walkers, which are the machine gun. However, there is a simple explanation for this. Skyguards are a primary weapon. Walkers and Rangers are a secondary weapon. If a lightning driver decides to put a Skyguard upon his lightning, effectively it cannot do any role other than anti-aircraft effectively. However, if a Sunderer or main battle tank chooses to put anti-aircraft on top, then they can still fulfill their main primary role regardless of what secondary weapon they have. Therefore, to balance this out, Skyguards are the most potent anti-aircraft weapon. So let's look at it in a little more detail. Skyguard has a faster bullet velocity than other flat cannons, at 400 meters per second rather than 325. Also, it does its maximum damage up to 100 meters rather than 20 meters for the Ranger, and the amount of damage drop off is relatively slight, only going down from 200 to 150. So what does this mean in practice? Well, the combination of the fact that it is a flat cannon, it has relatively fast bullet velocity and a relatively small damage drop off means it is effective out to very extended ranges. The higher bullet velocity means that you have to lead a little less than other flat cannons, and the fact that it's a flat cannon at all means that any shot in near proximity to the enemy will do damage. Now when you combine the various aspects of the Skyguard together, you get a package which is the most formidable anti-aircraft weapon in the game. At shorter distances, its relatively high damage output means that it has a good chance of shooting down enemy aircraft, particularly ESS. And given its relatively small damage drop-off, at extended distances it provides a very credible deterrent against enemy aircraft. Therefore, a well-placed Skyguard has the ability to shut down large areas of airspace to enemy aircraft. Now, whilst the Liberator has the raw damage output to destroy a Skyguard Lightning in a one-on-one duel, this is depending on the fact that the Liberator can sneak up to close range. Liberators render at about 1000 meters away. The Skyguard can instantly become effective at damaging the Liberator. Therefore, for this to be effective, the Liberator has to sneak up on the Skyguard and attack it from the rear. Therefore, the main threats the Skyguard face are other infantry and tanks. Now the flat cannon can do reasonable damage against infantry and okay damage against armour. However, it is also exceptionally inaccurate, particularly against infantry. Therefore, for anything other than the shortest distances, it is not an effective deterrent. When you combine this with the fact that a Skyguard is mainly focused on looking up in the sky, it remains highly vulnerable to enemy tanks and infantry. And now to the anti-aircraft secondary weapons, the Ranger and the Walker. Given these are secondary weapons, they are primarily in a support role in terms of AA. However, one thing you might have noticed is the time to kill for the Walker is incredibly small, very comparable to the Skyguard, whilst the Ranger's is pretty terrible. Therefore they have quite distinct roles. Given the Walker is a machine gun, not a flat cannon, you have to be accurate on the target to do any damage. But if accurate, you do very good damage. Therefore the Walker is very good against slow moving targets, be they Liberators or Galaxies. They're also good against ESFs who just happen to be hovering around. However, against fast moving targets it is very difficult to consistently hit with these guns. Now the Ranger, being a flat cannon, is relatively easy to hit with. However, it does very low damage. Therefore, the principal purpose in this weapon is to attempt to dissuade the enemy aircraft from being an area, but is extremely ineffective in being able to kill them. So, 2 questions remain. Firstly, which vehicles are these secondary anti-aircraft guns best suited to? And secondly, what is the point in having a dedicated anti-aircraft gun if other weapons, such as the Basilisk, can fulfill an anti-aircraft role? Well, let's consider the first question first. The AA secondary guns can be put on the Harasser, the main battle tank and the Sunderer. Now for the Ranger, given the fact it is primarily an air deterrent as opposed to an actual threat to enemy planes, it is much better suited to the Sunderer. This is because for the Sunder, the active role of deterring enemy aircraft to come to your area is particularly important, as frequently around Sunderers there are multiple infantry who are heavily vulnerable to enemy aircraft. But for a main battle tank, they are much more vulnerable to enemy liberators than they are to enemy ESFs. As a result, the deterrent capability of the Ranger is relatively lackluster against liberators. Therefore I would not recommend this gun on a main battle tank. So what about the Walker on the Sunderer and main battle tank? Well, the Walker excels against slow moving targets such as galaxies or less maneuverable targets such as liberators. However, it doesn't tend to excel against ESFs given how fast and agile these targets are. So it comes down to what role the Sunderer is fulfilling. Is it trying to defend an infantry spawn point and the infantry around it? In which case it's probably better off with the Ranger. In this way it can better dissuade ESFs from rocket podding them. But if your Sunderer is with a main armoured column, it's probably much better off with the Walker. This is because liberators pose a much greater threat to armoured columns than ESFs do. In addition, the Walker is very effective against infantry, provided you can lower the gun enough to actually aim at them, whilst the Ranger is utterly useless. Now in a main battle tank, this capacity of the Walker to kill liberators makes it a much more attractive option in my opinion than the Ranger. However, given the fact that the principal role of main battle tanks is to destroy enemy armour, attaching an anti-aircraft secondary weapon will severely reduce its capability in doing this. So I'd only recommend picking up an anti-aircraft secondary if you're with a group of armour that already has plenty of anti-tank capability. Therefore it's a suitable loadout if there's say 5 or 6 tanks out on the battlefield, but if there's say only 2 or 3, you lose far too much functionality and ability to engage enemy armour for the trade-off to be a greater deterrent against aircraft. And for harassers, I wouldn't recommend any anti-aircraft gun. The problem with harassers against aircraft is that they are far too squishy to be an effective anti-aircraft platform. The defence of a harasser relies on its mobility and its ability to get to inaccessible places. The superior speed and agility of aircraft, particularly ESFs, means that these advantages are heavily negated. Therefore it becomes a question of durability. Lightnings have the durability for this sort of engagement, but harassers do not. And finally, why pick up a dedicated anti-aircraft where you can say just use the Basilisk or the Cobalt? Well, one restriction that non-dedicated anti-aircraft secondary weapons have is they cannot elevate themselves nearly as high as proper anti-aircraft weapons. This allows enemy planes to float in your dead zone above you where you cannot fire back. Now Cobalts can only damage ESFs, therefore they are not a credible anti-aircraft option. Now Basilisks do good damage at close range. However, once we get to more extended ranges, 200 and 300 meters in this case, you can see that the time to kill drop off is pretty dramatic. When you also combine this with the fact that the Basilisk has lower bullet velocity than the Walker, it therefore is much harder for it to hit its target. It means that the Basilisk is effective at very short ranges against enemy aircraft, but falls off dramatically when they're at longer distances. And finally, the cost of these weapons. As you can see, they range from 750 certs to 1000. Therefore they are outside of the effective price range of new players. So you might ask, why cover them at all? Well, firstly, it's important to understand the anti-aircraft capabilities of the vehicles around you. And secondly, you should get decent exposure to the secondary guns when you're gunning on both Sunderers and main battle tanks. Whenever you hop into one of these vehicles, particularly Sunderers as a gunner, then you should have an idea of what the capabilities of these weapons are. So even if you can't afford to put them in one of your own loadouts, you can jump into somebody else's and use it effectively. So, in conclusion, the Skyguard is by far the most potent form of anti-aircraft. It works as both a deterrent and as a killing machine. However, being a dedicated anti-aircraft platform is effectively pigeonholed into this role. The anti-aircraft secondary weapons have 2 distinct roles: deterrent for the Ranger and killing potential for the Walker. Both have their role, but they are of principal use to the Sunderer. Main battle tanks principally give up too much functionality to have them on, and harassers are just inappropriate for anti-aircraft. Therefore you should gain most of your exposure to using these weapons whilst gunning on a Sunderer. Now in my next episode I'm going to be looking at anti-aircraft available to infantry. If you found this video interesting or helpful, please feel free to thumbs up, thumbs down, comment or subscribe as appropriate. In the meantime, have a good one, happy hunting, and Pintpot out.